Virgin man cared for the sick native girl with leaves and honey. That night, she called him my chosen one. The blood on his hands wasn't his own. Nathaniel Cartwright had seen death before, but never like this. Never so close he could smell the copper tang mixing with sage and morning dew. The Cheyenne girl lay motionless beside the creek, her bronze skin pale as winter moon, breathing so shallow he had to lean close to feel the whisper of air from her lips. 3 arrows jutted from a nearby cottonwood. Cavalry arrows, the kind that meant trouble for anyone caught helping the wrong side. But Nathaniel wasn't thinking about sides when he lifted her into his arms. The nearest settlement was Copper Ridge, 2 days' ride south through territory that belonged to neither white man nor native. It was land that remembered violence, where the earth held secrets deeper than any mine shaft. Nathaniel had been tracking a wounded deer when he found her, and now the deer was forgotten, bleeding out somewhere in the brush while he cradled something far more precious. She couldn't be more than 18. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a gash that ran from collarbone to breast. Fever radiated from her skin like heat from a branding iron. Her long black hair spilled over his forearm as he carried her toward his camp, each strand catching morning light like spider silk. Nathaniel had never touched a woman this way. At 35, he remained untouched by feminine hands, unmarked by feminine lips. The other men at the lumber mill back in Missouri had called him peculiar. His mother had called him particular. His father had called him a disappointment before consumption took him 3 winters past. But here, in the Colorado wilderness, none of that mattered. Only the weight in his arms mattered. Only the shallow breathing against his chest. His camp sat tucked between 2 massive boulders, hidden from both the cavalry patrols and the war parties that had been ranging through these hills since spring. A small fire crackled between stones, coffee still warm in the tin pot. His supplies were meager but sufficient: jerky, hardtack, coffee beans, and a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for the day he struck gold. He laid her on his bedroll, the rough wool blanket suddenly seeming inadequate for skin that looked soft as doeskin. Her breathing hitched, and she murmured something in a language he didn't recognize. The sound stirred something in his chest he'd never felt before. The wound was deep but clean. No sign of infection yet, though fever burned through her like wildfire. Nathaniel had patched up plenty of men during his time logging, but this was different. This required gentleness he wasn't sure he possessed. He tore strips from his spare shirt, boiled water in his cooking pot, and cleaned the wound as carefully as he could manage with hands more accustomed to axe handles and rifle stocks. She stirred when the hot cloth touched her skin, dark eyes fluttering open for just a moment. Eyes like deep water, like the bottom of a mountain lake where sunlight never reached. "Easy now," he whispered, though he doubted she understood English. "You're safe." Her eyes closed again, but not before he saw something in them he couldn't name. Trust, maybe, or recognition. The fever worsened as the sun climbed higher. She thrashed against the blanket, speaking rapidly in her native tongue, sometimes crying out as if arguing with invisible spirits. Nathaniel did what he could, bathing her forehead with cool creek water, forcing drops of water between her lips when she would take them. By afternoon, he was desperate. That's when he remembered the old Ute man he'd met last winter. Joseph Many Horses had traded him deer meat for tobacco and told him stories by the fire. Stories about healing plants that grew in the high country, about medicines the white man had forgotten. Wild mint grew thick along the creek. Nathaniel gathered it by the handful, crushing the leaves to release their oils. Honey came from a cache he discovered in a dead pine. The bees long gone, but their treasure preserved in amber sweetness. He boiled the mint into a tea, mixing in honey until it was thick as syrup. Getting her to drink proved challenging. She was delirious now, speaking to people who weren't there, reaching for things only she could see. But when he dripped the mixture onto her lips, she swallowed reflexively, some ancient instinct recognizing medicine. As evening painted the sky purple and gold, her fever finally broke. Nathaniel dozed fitfully beside the fire, jerking awake every time she stirred. Sometime after midnight, he felt her watching him. When he opened his eyes, she was sitting up, the blanket clutched to her chest, studying him with those deep water eyes. "You saved me," she said in accented English. The sound of her voice hit him like a physical blow. Soft and musical, with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned the language later in life. "I found you hurt," he managed. "Couldn't leave you there." She touched the bandage at her shoulder, wincing slightly. "The cavalry came to our camp. We scattered like rabbits. I fell from my horse crossing the creek. Your people, are they safe?" A shadow crossed her face. "Those who could run ran. The rest ... double quote she didn't finish, but he understood. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ayanna." The word fell between them like a stone dropped in still water. "It means eternal blossom." "Nathaniel?" he offered. "Just Nathaniel." She nodded solemnly, as if committing it to memory. "You have gentle hands, Nathaniel. Most white men have hands like stones." Heat crept up his neck. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from women who looked like Ayanna. In the firelight, her skin seemed to glow from within. The torn shoulder of her dress had slipped lower, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone, the gentle swell of her breast. He forced himself to look away. "You should rest. The wound needs time to heal. Why did you help me?" The question came quietly, but it carried weight. "Your people and mine, we are not friends." Nathaniel poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. How could he explain what he didn't understand himself? That something in her face had bypassed every rational thought in his head? That holding her had awakened something in him he'd thought was dead or missing? "Wasn't thinking about people," he said finally. "Was thinking about you." The silence stretched between them, filled with cricket song and the whisper of wind through pine needles. When he looked up, she was still watching him, but something had changed in her expression. Something softer. "My grandmother told stories about men like you," she said. "White men with hearts that remember the old ways. Men who see people instead of colors. Don't know about all that. I just did what felt right." Ayanna lay back down, but she didn't close her eyes. "In my tribe, when someone saves your life, they become responsible for it. You own my breath now, Nathaniel." The words sent a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "I don't want to own anything." "No," she agreed. "That's why my breath chose you." She slept then, finally peaceful, while Nathaniel sat watched through the long hours until dawn. He tried to convince himself this was temporary, but come morning he'd help her find her people and return to his prospecting. But every time he looked at her face, relaxed in sleep, he knew he was lying to himself. When the sun rose, painting the canyon walls gold and red, Ayanna woke with strength returning to her limbs. She sat up carefully, testing the movement of her shoulder. "The pain is less," she announced. "Your medicine worked." "Wasn't my medicine. Was Ute knowledge. Joseph many horses taught me about mint and honey." Her eyes widened. "You know Joseph? The storyteller?" "Met him last winter. Traded with him. He is my mother's cousin." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face completely, making her look even younger and impossibly beautiful. Perhaps this meeting was meant to be. Nathaniel felt heat rise in his cheeks again. "Don't know about meant to be, but I'm glad I found you." She studied his face with an intensity that made him squirm. "You are not like other white men I have known." "How many white men you known?" "Enough." The smile faded, replaced by something harder. "Traitors who cheat. Soldiers who kill. Men who take what they want and give nothing back. I'm not those men." "No," she agreed. "You are something different. Something ... She searched for the English word. "Something pure." The way she said it made his breath catch. He'd been called many things in his life, but never pure. Never by a woman whose voice sounded like mountain water over stones. They shared his breakfast of coffee and hardtack, sitting close enough that their knees almost touched. Ayanna ate carefully, still weak but improving with each hour. Color was returning to her cheeks, and her eyes had lost the glassy look of fever. "Where will you go?" Nathaniel asked as she finished the last of the coffee. "North, to the winter camps in the high country. If any of my people survived, they will go there. That's 3 days hard travel. You're not strong enough yet. I am stronger than I look. Stronger than most, I'd say. But not stronger than these mountains in winter. Storm's coming in. Can smell it on the wind." As if summoned by his words, a gust of cold air swept down the canyon, carrying the promise of snow. Ayanna shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You could stay," Nathaniel said before he could stop himself, "until you're fully healed. Until the weather clears." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her dark eyes. "Would you want that?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from the dying fire. Nathaniel had lived his entire life avoiding want, avoiding desire, avoiding the complications that came with caring about someone else. But looking at Ayanna, wrapped in his blanket with morning light in her hair, he felt 35 years of careful restraint crumbling like a dam made of sand. "Yes," he said simply. "I would want that." Her smile returned, smaller than before but somehow more significant. "Then I will stay." For a little while, the first snowflakes began falling as she spoke, fat white flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. But in the high country, Nathaniel knew they would be sticking. The passes would be closed soon, sealing them into this canyon until spring. He should have felt trapped. Instead, he felt something that might have been hope. That afternoon, as the snow fell heavier and the wind picked up, Ayanna grew restless. She walked the perimeter of his camp, testing her strength, exploring the hidden spaces between the rocks. Nathaniel watched her move, grace returning to her limbs like water finding its level. "This is a good place," she said, settling beside him near the fire. "Hidden but not trapped. You chose well. Wasn't really choosing. Was just following the creek, looking for color." "Color?" "Gold. Been prospecting these hills for 2 seasons. Have you found any?" Nathaniel shrugged. "Few flakes. Nothing worth getting excited about. But you stay. Got nowhere else to go." Ayanna was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance. "I understand that feeling. Since the soldiers came, I have nowhere else to go either." The simple statement hit him harder than any sob story could have. Here was someone who truly understood what it meant to be alone in the world. Someone who had lost everything and still managed to find reasons to smile. "We could be nowhere together," he said quietly. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the same loneliness that had driven him into the mountains in the first place. The same need for connection that he'd been denying for so long. "Yes," she said. "We could be nowhere together." As if to seal the agreement, the wind howled down the canyon, driving snow horizontal across the rocks. They were trapped now, whether they wanted to be or not. The passes wouldn't open until spring, maybe later if the winter was hard. But looking at Ayanna's face in the firelight, Nathaniel found he didn't mind being trapped. For the first time in his life, he had something worth staying for. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of howling wind and driving snow that turned the world white and silent. 3 days of sharing his small shelter, of learning the sound of her breathing, the way she hummed softly when she thought he wasn't listening. They talked during the long hours, sharing stories like trading cards. She told him about her childhood, about learning to ride before she could walk, about the grandmother who taught her which plants could heal and which could kill. He told her about the lumber camps, about the loneliness of cities full of people, about the day he decided to walk away from everything he'd known and look for gold in the Colorado mountains. "Why gold?" she asked on the second night as they lay on opposite sides of the fire, carefully maintaining the space between them. Seemed like something a man could trust. Something that wouldn't change or leave or die on you. "But gold is cold," she pointed out. It cannot keep you warm or sing you to sleep or care for you when you are sick. No, he agreed. But it can't hurt you either. Nothing that matters comes without the risk of hurt. Her words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Nathaniel knew she was right, but knowing and accepting were different things. He'd built his life around avoiding hurt, and it had left him with nothing but empty hands and an empty heart. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Ayanna fell asleep close to the fire. Sometime in the dark hours before dawn, she cried out in her sleep, thrashing against invisible enemies. Nightmare or memory, Nathaniel couldn't tell, but her distress was real enough. Without thinking, he moved to her side, gathering her against his chest the way he had that first morning by the creek. She settled immediately, her breathing evening out, her body relaxing into his warmth. He whispered into her hair. You're safe. I've got you. In her sleep, she pressed closer, one hand fisting in his shirt. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel understood what it meant to be needed by someone. Not for his labor or his money or his protection, but for the simple comfort of his presence. When morning came, she woke in his arms without surprise or embarrassment, as if she had been sleeping there for years instead of hours. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For chasing away the darkness. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did he. They lay there in the growing light, listening to the silence that meant the storm had passed, feeling the warmth that came from sharing breath and heartbeat. The snow will be deep, she said eventually. Travel will be impossible for weeks. Probably. Are you sorry? The question required honesty he wasn't sure he was ready to give. But looking into her eyes, dark and deep as mountain pools, he found the courage somewhere. No, he said. I'm not sorry. Her smile was answer enough. The days that followed took on a rhythm all their own. Nathaniel would check his snares and tend the fire while Ayanna gathered what food the winter landscape offered. Wild onions buried beneath the snow, bark from certain trees that could be ground into flour, berries that had dried on the branch and remained sweet through the cold months. She was teaching him things no white man's education had included: how to read weather and the behavior of birds, how to find water even when everything was frozen, how to move through snow without leaving tracks that would guide enemies to your camp. In return, he shared his knowledge of tools and metal, showing her how to maintain the rifle he'd given her for protection, how to sharpen a knife until it could split hair. They were becoming something together that neither had been alone, a partnership born of necessity but growing into something deeper with each passing day. It was during the 4th week of their strange domesticity that everything changed. Nathaniel had been checking snares along the creek when he heard voices. Male voices, speaking English with the clipped accent of career soldiers. He crept back toward camp, moving carefully through the snow, and saw them through the trees. 5 cavalry soldiers picking through his camp. Looking at his supplies, examining Ayanna's belongings, asking questions he couldn't hear but could guess. Ayanna was nowhere to be seen. Either she had hidden when she heard them coming, or they had already taken her. The thought of her in their hands made something dark and violent rise in his chest. He circled wide, coming up behind the largest boulder that sheltered their fire. The soldiers had made themselves at home, drinking his coffee and eating his food while they waited. She's here somewhere, one was saying. Tracks in the snow don't lie. Could have moved on, another suggested. Storm's been over for days. Not in this snow. Not wounded like she was. No, she's here, and so is whoever's been helping her. The sergeant, a hard-faced man with scars on his hands, spat into the fire. Standing orders are clear. Any Indian found off the reservation gets shot. Anyone helping them gets shot too. Nathaniel's blood turned to ice water in his veins. These weren't just soldiers looking for a missing person. They were executioners. A sound from above made them all look up. Ayanna stood on the rim of the canyon, 50 feet above their heads, silhouetted against the white sky like a dark angel. She had his rifle in her hands, and even from this distance, Nathaniel could see it was aimed at the sergeant. "You are not welcome here," she called down, her voice carrying clearly in the thin air. The soldiers scrambled for their weapons, but she had the advantage of position and preparation. "I would not move too quickly," she advised. "This rifle shoots straight, and I have nothing left to lose." The sergeant raised his hand slowly. "Easy now, girl. Nobody has to get hurt here. You killed my family. You burned my home. You have already heard everything I cared about. That wasn't us. That was different soldiers, different orders. All soldiers are the same soldiers." Her voice was steady, but Nathaniel could hear the pain underneath. "All orders are the same orders." The sergeant took a careful step forward. "You're outnumbered, girl. 5-1. Even if you get me, the others will get you. Maybe, but you will still be dead." It was a standoff that couldn't last. Nathaniel could see the other soldiers spreading out, looking for angles, for cover. In a few minutes, they would have her surrounded and the advantage would shift. He had to choose. Safety lay in staying hidden, in letting this play out without him. But that would mean watching Ayanna die, and he found that was a choice he couldn't make. Nathaniel stepped out from behind the boulder, his own rifle trained on the nearest soldier. "Actually, Sergeant, it's 5-2. The sudden appearance of a second gunman changed the dynamic completely. Now the soldiers were caught in a crossfire, high ground and low ground both covered. "Well, well," the sergeant said, not lowering his hands. "The white Indian lover shows himself. Just a man protecting what's his," Nathaniel replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "What's his?" The sergeant laughed, ugly and harsh. "Boy, you've been living with savages too long if you think you can own something like that. Don't own her. But I'll die before I let you hurt her." And in that moment, speaking those words aloud, Nathaniel realized they were absolutely true. Somewhere in the weeks of shared meals and quiet conversations, Ayanna had become more important to him than his own life. The virgin who had never kissed a woman was ready to kill for one. "Touching," the sergeant sneered. "Romeo and Juliet in buckskins. But you're still outnumbered, and we're still taking the squaw back to hang." "Nobody's taking anybody anywhere," Nathaniel said. "You're going to mount up and ride out, and you're going to forget you ever saw this place. Can't do that, boy. Got orders. Then you're going to die following them." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. 5 soldiers against 2 civilians, but the civilians held the better positions and the desperation of people with nothing left to lose. It was the youngest soldier who broke first, going for his sidearm with the quick, jerky motion of panic. Nathaniel's rifle spoke before the boy's gun cleared leather, the shot echoing off canyon walls like thunder. After that, everything happened at once. The remaining soldiers dove for cover while Ayanna's rifle cracked from above. Another man went down, clutching his shoulder and screaming. Nathaniel worked the bolt of his rifle, chambering another round, looking for targets. But the fight went out of the survivors quickly. 2 men down and facing disciplined fire from protected positions was more than their orders were worth. The sergeant called for a retreat, and within minutes they were dragging their wounded back toward their horses. "This isn't over," the sergeant shouted as they mounted up. "We know where you are now. We'll be back with more men." Nathaniel watched them disappear down the canyon, their threats echoing off the walls. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, he looked up to find Ayanna climbing down from her perch, moving carefully over the icy rocks. She reached the bottom and walked straight to him, her dark eyes wide with something that might have been awe. "You stayed," she said simply. "You could have hidden, but you stayed. Told you I'd protect you. You risked your life for me." A white man risking his life for an Indian woman. My grandmother's stories never spoke of such things. She was standing very close now, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, could smell the sage and wood smoke scent of her hair. Close enough that when she reached up to touch his face, her fingertips burned like brands against his skin. "You are not like other men," she whispered. "You are something rarer, Something ... She rose on her toes, and her lips touched his with the softness of butterfly wings landing on flower petals. It was barely a kiss, just the whisper of contact, but it hit Nathaniel like lightning striking dry timber. Every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his heart crumbled in that instant. Every reason he'd given himself for staying alone became meaningless. This woman, this beautiful, brave, impossible woman, was kissing him, and the world would never be the same. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "My chosen one," she whispered, and the words hit him harder than any bullet could have. That night, as they sat by the fire discussing their next move, everything felt different between them. The kiss had changed something fundamental, opened a door that could never be closed again. "They'll come back," Nathaniel said, poking at the coals with a stick. "Probably with a full troop. We can't stay here. Where can we go? The passes are still blocked. Winter has weeks left to run. There are places. Hidden valleys the snow doesn't reach as deep. Cave systems that stay warm. I know these mountains better than they do." Ayana nodded slowly. "Running again. Always running. Not running. Moving. There's a difference." "What difference?" "When you run, you leave things behind. When you move, you take what matters with you." She looked at him across the firelight, and he saw understanding dawn in her expression. "And what matters, Nathaniel?" The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. All his life, he'd been afraid to answer questions like that, afraid to name what mattered for fear of losing it. But fear seemed smaller now, less important than the truth in her eyes. "You matter," he said simply. "You matter more than anything else in the world." Her smile was radiant, lighting up her face like sunrise over mountains. "Then we will move together, wherever the trail leads." They spent the rest of the evening planning, discussing routes and supplies, but underneath the practical conversation, something deeper was building between them. Every accidental touch of hands reaching for the same object sent electricity through the air. Every shared glance held promises neither was quite ready to voice. When it came time to sleep, they arranged their bedrolls as they had every night since the storm ended. On opposite sides of the fire, carefully maintaining the space between them. But this time, as Nathaniel lay staring at the stars through the gap in the rocks above, he could feel Ayana watching him across the glowing coals. "Nathaniel?" Her voice was soft as wind through grass. "Yes? Are you afraid?" The question could have meant many things. Afraid of the soldiers, afraid of winter, afraid of the journey ahead. But somehow he knew she was asking about something deeper. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of caring too much. Of not being enough. Of losing you before I really have you." The honesty surprised him. He'd never spoken so openly about his fears, had barely admitted them to himself. "Come here," she said quietly. He hesitated for only a moment before rising and walking around the fire to where she lay wrapped in his spare blanket. She moved over to make room, lifting the edge of the wool in invitation. "You don't have to be afraid alone," she said as he settled beside her. "Fear is lighter when shared." She was warm against his side, soft and solid and real. Her head found the hollow of his shoulder as if it had been made to fit there. Her breath was sweet against his neck, her hair like silk beneath his chin. "I have never ... double quotes," he began, then stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "I know," she said gently. "It shows in the way you touch me. Like I might break. You are precious," he said into her hair. "More precious than gold, than anything I ever thought I wanted." She lifted her head to look at him, her face only inches from his in the firelight. "You speak like a man who has found treasure." "I have found treasure. I found you." This time, when she kissed him, there was nothing hesitant about it. Her lips were warm and sure, her tongue tracing the seam of his mouth until he opened for her with a groan that seemed to come from his soul. He had imagined kissing before in the lonely hours of his solitude, but imagination had fallen far short of reality. The taste of her, the sound of her breathing, The way she fit against him like the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, both changed by the contact. "My chosen one," she whispered again, and this time he understood what the words meant. Not just protector or companion, but something deeper. Something that transcended the boundaries of race and culture and the bitter history between their peoples. "Your chosen one," he agreed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They held each other through the long winter night, two souls who had found their other half in the most unlikely place at the most impossible time. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, new choices that would test everything they had found together. But tonight, in the warmth of shared breath and tangled limbs, they were complete. Tonight, they were home. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of their situation. Nathaniel woke with Ayanna still curved against his side, her breathing deep and even in sleep. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they could stay this way forever, wrapped in wool and warmth while the world outside remained frozen and distant. But the sound of horses in the distance shattered that illusion. He slipped carefully from beneath the blanket, grabbing his rifle and moving to the edge of their shelter. Through the gap between rocks, he could see riders picking their way up the canyon. Too many riders. The sergeant had made good on his threat. "Ayanna," he whispered, shaking her shoulder gently. "Time to go." She came awake instantly, the way someone learns to when survival depends on it. No confusion, no disorientation, just immediate awareness of danger. "How many?" she asked, already rolling their supplies into tight bundles. 15, maybe 20. Too many to fight. They moved with practiced efficiency, breaking camp in minutes. Everything essential went into 2 packs that could be carried easily over rough terrain. Everything else they left behind, including most of their food. The hidden trail Nathaniel had scouted weeks earlier began behind a screen of ice-covered brush. It climbed steeply up the canyon wall, following a ledge barely wide enough for one person. In summer, it would have been treacherous. In winter, it was nearly suicidal. But it was their only chance. They started climbing as the first soldiers reached their abandoned camp below. Shouts of anger and frustration echoed off the walls as the men discovered the cold ashes and empty shelters. "Tracks here," someone called. "Leading up the north wall." "Crazy bastards," another voice replied. "Nobody climbs Devil's Backbone in winter." Devil's Backbone. Even the name made Nathaniel's stomach tighten. But there was no turning back now. They climbed higher, the ledge growing narrower with each step, ice making every foothold uncertain. Ayanna moved like a mountain cat, sure-footed and graceful even on the treacherous path. Nathaniel followed more carefully, his heart pounding not just from exertion but from terror every time she leaned out over the drop to navigate around a particularly narrow section. Rifle fire cracked from below, bullets chipping stone near their feet. The soldiers had found the trail and were taking shots at extreme range. More harassment than genuine threat, but enough to keep them moving. They climbed for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, breath steaming in the thin air, muscles burning from the effort. The path curved around a buttress of rock, and suddenly they were out of sight of their pursuers, alone with nothing but sky and stone and the whisper of wind through empty spaces. There, Ayanna pointed ahead to where the ledge widened into a small platform. "We can rest." The platform was barely 6 feet square, carved from the living rock by centuries of wind and weather, but it felt like a palace after the narrow path. They collapsed against the stone wall, breathing hard, listening to the sounds of pursuit echoing from below. "They'll follow," Nathaniel said when he could speak again. "That sergeant won't give up easy. Let them follow. The path ahead gets worse." She was right. From the platform, the trail descended into a maze of canyons and hidden valleys that would challenge even experienced trackers. In winter, with snow covering the landmarks, it would be nearly impossible to follow. But first they had to survive the descent. They rested only long enough to catch their breath, then continued down the far side of the ridge. This path was older, more weathered, worn smooth by countless generations of feet. Nathaniel wondered who had built it, what ancient people had needed to move through these mountains with enough frequency to carve steps into solid rock. The descent took them through a forest of stunted pines, their branches heavy with snow that fell in soft whispers around their feet. No sound of pursuit reached them here. Either the soldiers had given up, or they were too far ahead to hear. They emerged from the trees into a hidden valley Nathaniel had never seen before. It stretched for miles between high walls, its floor covered with grass that somehow stayed green beneath the snow. A hot spring bubbled from the rocks at one end, its steam rising like incense in the cold air. "This place," Ayanna breathed, wonder in her voice. "It is sacred. My grandmother told stories of such places, but I thought they were only legend." They made camp beside the spring, the warm water melting the snow in a wide circle around the source. For the first time in days, they could build a proper fire without fear of the smoke being seen. For the first time since the soldiers found them, they could truly rest. As evening painted the sky purple and gold, they sat beside the spring watching steam rise into the twilight. The water was hot enough to cook in, warm enough to bathe, clean enough to drink. It was like finding paradise in the middle of hell. "How did you know about this place?" Ayanna asked. "I didn't. Just followed the trail and hoped. The trail knew where to lead you." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "My grandmother always said the spirits guide the pure of heart to places of power." "Don't know about pure of heart." "I know about pure of heart." She moved closer until her thigh pressed against his. "A pure heart saved my life. A pure heart protected me from soldiers. A pure heart brought me to this sacred place." The praise made him uncomfortable. All his life, he'd thought of himself as ordinary at best, worthless at worst. But in Ayanna's eyes, he saw reflected a man he barely recognized. Someone worthy of love, worthy of sacrifice, worthy of the trust she placed in him. "Been thinking," he said, staring into the steaming water, "about what comes next." "What comes next?" "Spring, when the passes open. You could go north, find your people, start over." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, controlled. "Is that what you want? For me to go north when spring comes?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything he'd been trying not to think about. All winter, he'd been living in a bubble where tomorrow didn't exist, where they could stay hidden in their canyon forever. But tomorrow always came, and with it the need to make choices that would shape the rest of their lives. "Want doesn't matter," he said finally. "What matters is what's best for you. And you think what's best for me is to leave. I think what's best for you is to have choices. To not feel trapped with a man who can't offer you anything but running and hiding." She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes blazing in the firelight. "You think I stayed because I was trapped? You think I kissed you because I had no choice? I think you stayed because you were hurt and alone and I was the only option." The slap came so fast he barely saw it coming. Her palm connected with his cheek with a crack that echoed off the canyon walls, followed immediately by a silence so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you decide what I think, what I feel, what I want?" He touched his cheek, tasting blood where her ring had cut his lip. "Ayanna, no. You listen now. You listen and you understand." She rose to her feet, pacing beside the spring like a caged wolf. "I am not some child who doesn't know her own mind. I am not some helpless creature who attaches herself to the first man who shows kindness. I didn't mean. I have had choices, Nathaniel. I have had white traders offer me marriage in exchange for land rights. I have had warriors from 3 tribes court me with horses and promises. I have had chances to go east, to learn the white man's ways in their schools." She stopped pacing, standing over him with her hands on her hips. "I chose none of them. I chose you. Not because I was trapped or desperate or grateful, but because my heart recognized something in you that it had never found anywhere else." The words hit him like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the self-doubt that had defined his entire life. "But I'm nobody. I'm just a failed prospector with nothing to offer. You are the man who held me while I burned with fever. You are the man who faced 5 armed soldiers to protect me. You are the man who brought me to this sacred place through paths only the spirits know." She knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands with the same gentleness he'd shown her that first morning by the creek. "You are my chosen one, and I am yours. Not because we have no other choice, but because we choose each other above all other choices." When she kissed him this time, there was nothing hesitant or questioning about it. This was a claiming, a declaration, a promise sealed with the press of lips and the sharing of breath. This was a woman telling a man without words that she was his completely, by choice and desire and the mysterious alchemy that turns 2 separate souls into something greater than the sum of their parts. They made love beside the sacred spring as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 virgins discovering together what it meant to join not just bodies but spirits. Nathaniel had imagined this moment countless times during the long nights of winter, but reality proved infinitely more complex than fantasy. There was awkwardness at first, fumbling with unfamiliar territory, the nervous laughter of inexperience. But there was also tenderness beyond anything he dreamed possible, and a connection so deep it seemed to reach into his bones. Ayanna guided him with patience and whispered encouragement, her hands showing him where to touch, how to move, when to be gentle, and when to let passion take control. She was teacher and student both, learning his responses even as she taught him hers. When they finally joined together, when she took him into her body with a gasp that was part pain and part wonder, Nathaniel understood why people wrote songs about love. This wasn't just physical pleasure, though the pleasure was beyond description. This was recognition on the cellular level, 2 halves of something that had been broken finding each other and becoming whole. They moved together in the ancient rhythm, slow and careful at first, then with increasing urgency as their bodies learned the dance. The hot spring bubbled beside them, sending clouds of steam into the cold air, wrapping them in warmth and mystery. When release came, it came to both of them simultaneously, a crescendo that left them clinging to each other as if they might be swept away by the force of it. Nathaniel had never felt anything like it. This complete surrender of self, this moment when the boundaries between individual souls dissolved entirely. Afterward, they lay entwined in their blankets, skin still singing with sensation, hearts gradually slowing from their frantic rhythm. The stars seemed brighter overhead, the steam from the spring more magical, the silence more profound. "Now you understand," Ayanna whispered against his chest. "Now you know why I chose you." He understood more than she realized. He understood that everything in his life had been leading to this moment, this woman, this perfect completion of himself. The years of loneliness hadn't been wasted time. They had been preparation, a clearing away of everything unnecessary so that when love finally came, there would be room for it to take root and grow. They spent 3 days in the hidden valley, making love and making plans, talking about everything and nothing while the world outside remained frozen and distant. It was a honeymoon of sorts, though neither spoke the word aloud. They were beyond the need for formal ceremonies, bound by something deeper than legal documents or religious rites. On the 4th morning, they woke to find fresh snow falling, heavy flakes that would erase any tracks they might have left. It was time to move again, to find a place where they could wait out the rest of winter in safety. The trail led deeper into the mountains, through valleys that seemed untouched by human presence. They found caves warmed by underground springs, forests where the snow never quite reached the ground, hidden places that felt removed from the ordinary world. But it was in one of these perfect hiding places that their greatest test came. They had been following a game trail along a ridge when Nathaniel spotted the smoke. A thin column rising from the valley below, barely visible against the gray sky. Someone else was out here in the wilderness, Someone who felt safe enough to build a fire in daylight. Could be trappers, he said, studying the distant smoke through his spyglass. Or hunters. Could be soldiers, Ayana replied, her voice tight with tension. They debated for an hour whether to investigate or circle wide around the unknown camp. Caution argued for avoidance, but their supplies were running low, and contact with other humans might mean a chance to trade for food or information. In the end, it was the sound of children laughing that made their decision for them. No soldiers traveled with children. No trappers brought families into the high country in winter. This had to be refugees, people like themselves looking for sanctuary in the wilderness. They approached carefully, Nathaniel with his rifle ready, Ayana with her knife loose in its sheath. The camp revealed itself gradually as they descended into the valley. 3 makeshift shelters built against a cliff face, a central fire tended by an elderly woman, children playing in the snow nearby. It was a family group. 2 men, 3 women, 5 children ranging in age from toddler to teenager. All of them Native American. All of them bearing the hollow-eyed look of people who had lost everything and were still figuring out how to survive. The older of the 2 men spotted them first, rising smoothly from where he'd been working on a broken snowshoe. His hand went to the knife at his belt, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Peace, Nathaniel called out in the few words of Cheyenne he'd learned from Ayana. We seek no trouble. The man's eyes widened at hearing his language from a white mouth. His gaze shifted to Ayana, taking in her traditional dress, her proud bearing, the way she moved beside Nathaniel as an equal rather than a prisoner. You are far from the reservation, the man said in careful English. There is no reservation for us, Ayana replied. We make our own way. The conversation that followed revealed the tragic story they'd become too familiar with. These people were survivors of the attack on Ayana's village, members of her extended clan who had managed to escape when the soldiers came. They'd been hiding in the mountains all winter, slowly starving, slowly freezing, held together only by their refusal to surrender. Among them was Gray Wolf, a man near Nathaniel's age who had once courted Ayana. He was handsome in the way warriors were supposed to be handsome, with broad shoulders and scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. The way he looked at Ayana, the careful distance he maintained from Nathaniel, made it clear that his feelings hadn't died with the changing seasons. She was promised to me, Gray Wolf said on their second night in the shared camp. They sat around the fire, the children asleep, the adults speaking in low voices about the future. Her father agreed to the marriage before the soldiers came. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He looked at Ayana, but she was staring into the flames, her expression unreadable. Many things were promised before the soldiers came, she said quietly. Many promises died with the village. Some promises survive, Gray Wolf pressed. Some obligations transcend death. Some obligations, Ayana agreed. But not all. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring drawn too tight. Nathaniel found himself caught between worlds, unsure of his place in a conversation about traditions and promises he didn't fully understand. She has chosen her path, he said finally. She chooses to stay with me. Gray Wolf's laugh was harsh as winter wind. Chosen or been taken? I have seen what white men call choice when it comes to Indian women. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Nathaniel felt his temper rising, but Ayana's hand on his arm held him back. Gray Wolf, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to leadership. You speak from pain, and I understand that pain. But you will not dishonor me by suggesting I don't know my own heart. Your heart may know, but does your mind? This man, what can he offer you? What future does he promise? He cannot take you to his people, they would kill you for your blood. He cannot bring you to ours, we have no home left to bring you to. I can offer her my life, Nathaniel said quietly. My protection. My love. Love. Gray Wolf spat into the fire, making it hiss. White man's love burns quick and dies young. When the novelty fades, When desire becomes routine, what then? Will you still love her when she is old? When she bears you children who belong to neither world? The words cut deeper than Nathaniel wanted to admit because they gave voice to fears he'd been trying not to acknowledge. What did the future hold for them? Where could they go? What life could they build in a world that would see their union as either abomination or betrayal? But when he looked at Ayanna, saw the absolute trust in her dark eyes, those fears became less important than the simple truth of what he felt. "I'll love her until my last breath," he said. "And beyond, if the spirits allow it." Pretty words. But love doesn't fill bellies or turn aside bullets. Love doesn't build houses or raise crops or provide security for old age. No, Nathaniel agreed. But it does something else. It makes life worth living. The conversation died there, but the tension remained. Over the following days, as they shared resources and planned their next moves, Nathaniel felt the weight of silent judgment from some members of the group. Not all of them. The children had accepted him immediately, and the elderly woman who tended the fire seemed to approve of his devotion to Ayanna. But Grey Wolf's skepticism had planted seeds of doubt in others. The crisis came a week later, when scouts reported a large cavalry patrol moving through the lower valleys. The soldiers were conducting a systematic search, checking every possible hiding place, clearly determined to find the missing survivors. "We have to scatter," the elder of the group declared. "Small groups move faster, leave fewer tracks." It was the practical decision, the one that gave everyone the best chance of survival. But it also meant separation, possibly permanent. These people had been clinging together as the last remnant of their destroyed community. Breaking apart might save their lives, but it would also complete the destruction that had begun with the attack on their village. "There is another way," Grey Wolf said into the silence that followed the elder's pronouncement. "One of us could draw the soldiers away, lead them on a false trail while the others escape to safety." Everyone understood what he was suggesting. It would be a suicide mission, one person sacrificing themselves so the others could live. Noble, but effectively a death sentence for whoever volunteered. "I'll do it," Nathaniel said immediately. "I'm the best tracker here, best able to lay a false trail they'll follow." "No." Ayanna's voice cut through the debate like a blade. "You are not dying for my people. They're my people too now." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than Nathaniel had intended. He saw surprise in several faces, acceptance in others. Grey Wolf studied him with new respect, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Not like this," Ayanna continued. "Not by throwing your life away." But as they debated options and possibilities, a solution began to emerge. Not sacrifice, but strategy. Not one person dying, but all of them working together to turn the hunters into the hunted. The plan that developed over the next hour was audacious in its simplicity. They would lead the soldiers into Devil's Garden, a maze of canyons and dead-end passages where even experienced guides could become lost. The rock formations created echoes that made it impossible to determine the direction of sounds. In winter, with snow covering the landmarks, it became a death trap for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. As dawn approached and the time for action arrived, Nathaniel found himself standing with Grey Wolf at the edge of their temporary camp. The warrior was checking his weapons with the methodical care of someone preparing for battle. "You don't have to do this," Nathaniel said quietly. "This isn't your fight anymore. It became my fight when I saw how you look at her." Grey Wolf replied without looking up from his rifle. "And how she looks at you? What do you mean?" Grey Wolf finished his inspection and shouldered the weapon. "I courted Ayanna for 2 summers. I brought horses, offered bride price, spoke pretty words about the future we would build together. But I never once saw her face light up the way it does when you walk into a room." The admission couldn't have been easy for a man with Grey Wolf's pride. Nathaniel felt something shift between them, not friendship exactly, but understanding. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said. "I never meant to come between you and her. You didn't come between us." You showed me there was nothing between us to begin with." Grey Wolf smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "She was never mine to lose, but she is yours to protect." They executed the plan with precision born of desperation. The false trail led through increasingly rugged terrain as they approached Devil's Garden, the soldiers forced to dismount and lead their horses over rough ground. But the cavalry was persistent, their superior numbers and equipment telling in the long chase. The maze opened before them like the maw of some enormous beast. Red rock walls rising hundreds of feet on either side of passages barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. Ayanna led them through the correct sequence of turns with the confidence of someone who had played here as a child, while behind them the soldiers entered the labyrinth with the enthusiasm of hunters who thought they had finally cornered their prey. In the center of the maze, where dozens of passages branched off in all directions, they put the final phase of their plan into action. Each person took a different route deeper into the maze, laying false trails that would draw the soldiers away from the true exit. It was dangerous, requiring them to separate when they needed each other most. Nathaniel found himself alone in a passage that seemed to go on forever, laying a trail of disturbed snow and broken twigs while listening for sounds of pursuit. The walls rose so high above his head that only a narrow strip of gray sky was visible, making the passage feel more like a tomb than a canyon. He was backing out of the passage when he heard voices. Two soldiers, maybe three, moving through the maze parallel to his position. Their conversation echoed off the walls in a way that made it impossible to determine their exact location, but they were close. Close enough that he could make out individual words. When he finally rejoined the others at the predetermined exit point, they were all accounted for and unharmed. The soldiers remained trapped in the maze, their shouts and curses echoing faintly from the stone labyrinth. "How long before they find their way out?" Nathaniel asked. "Days," Ayanna replied with satisfaction. "Maybe weeks if the weather turns bad." They were free, at least for now. But as they made their way through the wilderness toward a new sanctuary, Nathaniel knew their real journey was just beginning. They had found each other, chosen each other, fought for each other. Now they had to figure out how to build a life together in a world that insisted such love was impossible. That night, as they camped under stars that seemed close enough to touch, Ayanna spoke the words that would define everything that came after. "Tomorrow we start building our future," she said, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Not the future others expect, but the one we choose." Nathaniel squeezed her fingers, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. Two souls who had found their other half in the most unlikely place at the most impossible time. "My chosen one," he whispered, and felt her smile against his shoulder. "Always," she promised, "until the stars fall from the sky."